In First Steps Conversations, Session 6, Fellowship, we talk about peacemaking. I believe that the number one problem in the church around the world today is people do not know how to make peace with people that have offended them. Because of that, there's anger and also bitterness. Jesus gives the command in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Now, when we talk about blessed are the peacemakers, what do I mean by blessed? These are people that find joy in their relationships. And so if you have a relationship and you're not finding joy in that relationships, perhaps you need to learn the principles of peacemaking. I believe that the mark of maturity in a believer is the ability to receive grace and then extend it to others. What do I mean by that? When you receive grace, you stop condemning yourself when you're inadequate, when you commit a sin. And when you extend it to others, that means when they sin against you, you also forgive them. Now, there will be two areas of forgiveness in your life. First of all, in the church. Many of us come from situations that have been hurtful in the church. And to be honest, since all of us are inadequate and we're a part of the church that's filled with inadequate people, all of us will hurt one another sooner or later. You'll be hurt and you will also hurt someone else. And so in order to stay connected to the body of Christ, we need to learn to be peacemakers. And then another area in which you'll learn to be a peacemaker is in the relationships that God gives you. Let's remember that Christianity is relationships. And God restored his relationship to you through forgiveness of Jesus Christ. And you will need to restore relationships with others through forgiveness also. And if you don't learn to forgive, then your relationships with God, others, and self will be seriously impacted. This is why peacemaking is so important. In First Steps Conversation, in the lesson we have on fellowship, we will teach you how to identify bitterness and anger in your heart, and also steps to learn how to be an effective peacemaker. Just a testimony from my own life. I've talked often in the past about my mother and what a significant believer she was. She was a prayer warrior. Probably the reason why I survived those days when I was wandering out of the faith was because my mother was praying for me. My mother was killed in a car wreck. Probably the most difficult experience that I ever had was being able to go through that and just dealing with my relationship with God, why he allowed that to happen. And I was able to see a big picture in and through that situation, that God, even in the midst of that, was still working all things together for the good. And so God was able to give me this sense of peace, and that this would all work out, even in the midst of my mother being killed in a car wreck. But then, after I worked through that forgiveness and anger towards God, I had one of the most difficult experiences of my life, because I went to the courtroom where the man who was driving the car was to be tried in a jury trial. And before the trial, he came up to me and he looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be involved in an accident that killed your mother." And then he looked at me and he said, very simply, he said, "Would you forgive me?" And that was a crucial point in my life, because I knew that I needed to forgive him, and I didn't want to forgive him. But I also knew that once I did forgive him, I had to pull back the trial. It couldn't go forward, because if I forgave him, that means God's grace, as I had received it, had to be extended to him. And I think that probably one of the most crucial decisions that I ever made as a believer was I had received grace from God, but I had to extend that same grace to another man. A difficult time, but because of that, I experienced freedom in Jesus. So let me explain about this freedom that I've experienced. I've been a pastor for 49 years of a very large church. And as a pastor of that church, over and over again, people offend me. They're always saying things and doing things that would make, most people angry and bitter. But you know what? I forget about it. It just doesn't bother me. And I've often asked, why don't I get mad when people do things? And I go back to that point where I was able to extend that forgiveness to the man who was involved in the automobile accident that killed my mother. And because I was able to extend that grace and forgiveness to him, God just gives me the grace and forgiveness I need in my daily living situations to forgive others. That's what peacemaking is all about. And without the supernatural grace of God, we will never, ever have the fullness of joy in the relationships that God intends with Him, others, and self.